Welcome, welcome, welcome. Ed Martin here in a Pro America Report. Don't forget, proamericareport.com. If you want to sign up for my daily email, the wink, what you need to know, sign up there, proamericareport.com. And always go to theanswersandiego.com to track down all the bits and pieces. Great to be with Andrea Kaye earlier tonight. She's super. Andrea Kaye show's important to track and watch closely. We'll actually talk to her in a few minutes, so looking forward to that. And we will also have a visit, catch up with, this is important. I haven't had somebody from Numbers USA on in a while. In a few minutes, we'll talk with Chris Chmielewski about exactly what is happening. The president's immigration order from last week was a big deal, so we'll visit with him about that. People seem to miss it. You're watching what's going on. But, let me cover... Well, what you need to know, the daily wink, which you're waiting for. I want to get to that. Let me preview it for you. It is this: St. Louis leads. St. Louis leads. But before I get to St. Louis leads and why, because the answers are unbelievably interesting. One is stand your ground. If you're a family and you got people coming at your house, stand your ground. Second is Cardinal Tim Dolan. He's from New York, you think, but he's actually a St. Louis boy, born and raised in St. Louis. I'll tell you about that. And finally, I want to explain to you how where leadership's going to come from, and St. Louis is part of the solution. But before we get to that, I've been talking about the Pledge of Allegiance for a few weeks. It's been months. On my daily Periscope, during the afternoon, I do a daily Periscope, about 15 minutes. I'll talk about some of these topics. It's kind of practice for the show. At Eagle Ed Martin on Twitter, if you want to go listen or go track it down. But I do the Pledge of Allegiance every single day on the Periscope. I got a flag, a beautiful photo of a flag in my office. Got some actual flags in my office, and so I'll go and do the Pledge of Allegiance every day. And I want to tell you about why I want the Pledge of Allegiance to catch on. I want it to catch back on, because what you realize is most people about 40 and younger, maybe 45 and younger, they stopped saying the Pledge of Allegiance as regularly at school. If you're 45 or older, I asked General Flynn this question last week. I've asked you all, the listeners, what's their first memory of the Pledge of Allegiance? Most people 45 and older, maybe 50 and older, but I think it's 45 is about the cutoff. They remember saying the Pledge of Allegiance when they were in school, like first grade, kindergarten, whatever it was. That was General Flynn. He remembers kindergarten every day. But here's an interesting thing about the pledge. The Pledge of Allegiance was written by a man named Francis Bellamy. And he wrote the Pledge of Allegiance, and he was a socialist, full-on socialist. This is back at the latter days of the 1800s, like 1890, I think. I might be getting the date a little wrong. But there were lots of socialists coming to America, and some of them succeeded in messing things up. But Bellamy wrote this Pledge of Allegiance because it was kind of a thing to do, to have pledges when you join something. And his was a pledge about America. At the end of it, you'll hear it, liberty and justice for all. He wanted all this, evening out and all. And so, but it was a good pledge, right? And he knew what is true, which is when you hear something or say something or participate in something over and over again, it has an effect on you, on yourself and on your being, and it knits us together. It's one of the reasons why, some of our people, my friends and the Eagles, are reciting the Declaration of Independence, and so often we talk about the great speeches and moments. If you haven't heard Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address read out loud, you're missing something. Anyway, knitting ourselves together, Pledge of Allegiance, national anthem. There's a reason why the protests over the national anthem are powerful, because you're messing with, for a lot of Americans, something that's really powerfully part of us, right? Saying our oaths when you're sworn into the military or to be a law enforcer, all these things, law enforcement person, they knit us together. Well, Bellamy had this pledge, and it started to catch on. But in 1952, as we faced the threat of world communism, the Soviets were surging, Americans were worried, men and women who believed in America especially were worried. We'd won two world wars together. And there was a movement to add the words "under God" to the pledge. So the socialist pledge that was knitting us together, we stole it. We got it back from the socialists by putting God in there, because socialists don't believe in God. They believe in the government, and they believe in knitting you together under man, not under God. So the Pledge of Allegiance, 31 words. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It's a darn good thing. So say the pledge, get focused on the pledge, bring it back in your family, in your community. I know this 4th of July is going to be a funny one. There's not going to be quite as many parades. There's not going to be as many, celebrations, especially with all of our military in San Diego area and across the country. The reasons to celebrate, it's all warped by this coronavirus stuff. But the pledge is there. You can say it. All right, let me get to what you need to know. Today's wink. Today's wink is St. Louis Leads. St. Louis Leads. Did you see the video of the couple who came out of their home and they said, you're not going to mess with our home in St. Louis? Have you seen this yet? They're in front of this big, beautiful mansion. Well, let me lay this out for you. It's a wonderful story. Over the past 4 or 5 days in St. Louis, there have been Black Lives Matter targeting the St. Louis statue. It's a massive, beautiful statue that sits in front of the St. Louis Art Museum. The St. Louis Art Museum is in Forest Park, which is larger than Central Park. It's a big, beautiful park. It was the site of the 1904 World's Fair. And when the World's Fair came to a city or a city in a nation 120, 116 years ago, it was a much bigger deal because you had to travel by boat and you had to stay for months. And they built huge. It was the St. Louis, the World's Fair and Exposition is what it's called. And they brought in all these things. It's the place for the first place. They say it's the first place for the hot dog, I think, or maybe the ice cream cone. That's the one. And all kinds of things come and they test things there. You know, it was all kinds of people are at these things, inventors, and they build gazebos, and a lot of that structure in St. Louis, in the Forest Park are still there. There's a Spanish pavilion that's left over. Part of the art museum is left over. Statues, all these things. And when you go down to the park, on one side is Washington University, on the other side is big healthcare center, BJC. Barnes Jewish Hospital, Barnes Jewish Christian Hospital System, all merged together. And when you go on the other side of the park, there's all these big, beautiful homes that were built at the time that you were going to have guests come to St. Louis for 6 months, sometimes up to a year. Ambassadors came and heads of state all came for the St. Louis Expo, the World's Fair. That neighborhood, one of the streets is called Portland Place. So after the Black Lives Matters, people went up onto Art Hill and protested in front of the St. Louis statue, and hundreds of St. Louisans came and prayed there. Christians and some Catholics. Some of the Catholics were there, and some Protestants and others came together to pray. Protest. Because Black Lives Matter said St. Louis was a mean guy. This is nonsense. But they marched off the Black Lives Matter through that neighborhood. And then when they got to one of the streets, Portland Place, and they're chanting and ugly. And remember, the power, what you need to know is the power of the TV, CNN and MSNBC, and all the coverage of the violence in Lafayette Square, in D.C., in Minnesota, Minneapolis, burning, all these things. Well, one of the families there said, I'm not going to tolerate this. And the head of the household came out. They have his name all over the internet now, but came out with a big AR-15. It looked like it. And his wife had a pistol. And they said, stay off our yard. And here's what you need to know. If the media brainwashes the American people, not with the pledge or something positive, but with the message of hate and burn our places and do destruction, don't be surprised if a citizen doesn't act like the St. Louis couple and say, no, not my house, not my family, not my neighborhood, and stands up. That's what they're doing here. So God bless that family, but understand the scary part of this. The media's feeding this division, not the people, not the people. Second part of St. Louis Leads right here. Cardinal Tim Dolan, the Cardinal Archbishop of New York, he wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. I have it in my hands. I printed it out. The title of it is, Even the Bible is Full of Flawed Characters. And Cardinal Dolan was born and raised in St. Louis, a huge St. Louis Cardinals fan. He's a great guy. I've met him like a million times. He's now in New York City. But he wrote a long piece, and he said in here, look, if the notion is that whoever's got personal flaws is no longer deemed appropriate, well, we all give up. The Bible's full of characters who convert. Saul becomes Paul. Mary Magdalene becomes Saint Mary Magdalene. I'll get on and on. But he also says a wonderful thing that probably only a guy like him could get away with because it's so potent. He says, you remember when we were going to raise the status of Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday to a national holiday? Some people objected, saying that his own self-admitted flaws, adultery, dishonesty, nobody thinks that we should stop, I don't, thinking about Martin Luther King Jr. and his message because he was a flawed character. Everybody's flawed. Read Cardinal Dolan and understand it's what an adult thinks about this idea. We believe in learning from the past, and here's what you need to know. St. Louis Leads. Dolan points out, it's the communists that did this in the Cultural Revolution 50 years ago in China because they want to get rid of your history so you live in the present, and you know who will be the present dominator in your life? The state. That's what they're trying to do. And that's what you need to know. All right, let's take a break. We got some great guests. We'll be right back. Don't forget, ProAmericaReport.com. Visit there, sign up for the Daily Wink. It's Ed Martin. You listen to the Pro America Report. Be right back.